I'm Roy Lee Lindsay with the North Carolina Pork Council, and I want everyone to remember bacon makes everything better.
Welcome to This Week in College Football with David Glenn, brought to you by our great friends at the North Carolina Pork Council. Thank you so much for joining us again this week. I'm Chris Edwards. So happy to be back with DG here in year 2 of our quickly growing North Carolina Sports Network. Once again on our weekly show this year, DG and I are going to mostly look ahead at the upcoming week's college football matchup. We'll also discuss college football's biggest headlines and take a quick glance back with some of DG's expert analysis on the biggest games and developments from the previous week's schedule. David, now in his 38th year covering college football in North Carolina and around the Atlantic Coast Conference. DG, always great to be with you, my friend.
Hey, Chris, in the spirit of late November and early happy Thanksgiving to you and your family, we at the North Carolina Sports Network are super thankful that you are a part of our team, and I am ready to dive right into this week's action.
Feeling is certainly mutual as we dive into it today. We're, of course, going to get to some of the biggest developments from last weekend, which included victories for UNC, East Carolina, and at the Division II level, the newly crowned South Atlantic Conference champion, Wingate, ever how you say it, plus a rough loss for Wake Forest, and the Charlotte 49ers dismissing their head coach, Biff Poggi, in his second year. We'll get to that later, but first, let's look ahead to this week's action here in Week 13. Some intriguing storylines involving in-state teams. We get to those right away in our segment brought to you by our great friends at Atlantic Tire and Service, where DG and his family take all their vehicles for routine maintenance, service needs, and a world-class selection of new tires. Atlantic Tire and Service, your one-stop tire and auto repair provider with highly trained technicians and a sales and support staff that are second to none. They have grown to 6 Triangle area locations, 2 in Raleigh, 2 in Cary, 1 in Durham, and 1 in Wake Forest. You can learn more at AtlanticTireOnline.com. We'll start here, DG, in Chestnut Hill, 6-4 North Carolina. Tar Heels now bowl eligible for Mack Brown at 5-5 Boston College. Noon game on the CW. Tar Heels a 2-point favorite up in the greater Boston area on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, first, I'm going to give Carolina a lot of credit for turning its season around. The Tar Heels were 3-4 and had just lost 4 consecutive games when they had that open date in mid-October. So it is a credit to Mack Brown, his coaching staff, the team leaders like our recent David Glenn Show guest, J.J. Jones, the wide receiver, also the edge rusher, Kamen Rucker. It's a credit to all of them and their teammates that the Heels stuck together and have now won 3 straight against Virginia and Florida State and Wake Forest heading into these final 2 games this week against Boston College, and, of course, that season finale in Chapel Hill against NC State. The keys to Carolina's season have been, number one, the absolutely sensational play of junior running back Omarion Hampton, who is number 2 nationally with 142 rushing yards per game and might be like a Heisman Trophy contender if it wasn't for that Boise State running back who's going to collect a lot of those awards. If not the Heisman, maybe the Doak Walker or whatever. The return from injury of edge rusher Kamen Rucker on defense, we've talked about it on the show. I've written about it at ncsportsnetwork.com. The Tar Heels numbers, with and without Kamen Rucker, offer a truly striking contrast, as much as you'll see about the impact of any single defensive player. And the gradual improvement really is the third issue in the positive sense for the Tar Heels. They're extremely inexperienced quarterback and extremely inexperienced offensive line. They've gotten better. Jacoby Criswell is a 5th-year senior, but between his 4 years now at Carolina and that 1 season at Arkansas, this is the first time that he has been the number 1 guy at QB. He started this season as the Heels' 3rd stringer, and he's made the most of this opportunity after that injury way back at the Minnesota season opener to Max Johnson. On the offensive line, their veteran guard, Willie Lampkin, is actually going to make some All-America teams this year. but the brand new guys around him, all first-time starters at the college level, are a lot better now than they were in September. And that's another thing that I think reflects well on the coaching staff and those players, because that inexperienced line could have been a season-long disaster, and it has not been. I do think the Tar Heels are slightly better than Boston College going to this week's matchup. And Carolina has played very well on the road this season overall, but this is a tricky matchup in my eyes for several reasons. First, Bill O'Brien of BC is a very good football coach. This is the guy that legendary New England Patriots coach Bill Belichick entrusted with key staff positions at the NFL level, and that legendary Alabama coach Nick Saban had as his own offensive coordinator with the Crimson Tide just last year. 2 weeks ago, in maybe the Eagles' best game of the season, they just absolutely ran all over what I think is a pretty good Syracuse team in what became a 37-31 BC victory, with 2 different Boston College running backs going well over 100 yards rushing. Number 2, BC recently made a change at quarterback, which always scares defensive coordinators, perhaps including the Tar Heels' Jeff Collins. Thomas Castellanos was an incredible athlete for the Eagles under 2 different coaches these last couple of years, but he just could not execute what Bill O'Brien was looking for in the passing game. So he was recently demoted from the starting position, and he's already indicated in today's world he's headed into the transfer portal. It's only November. The new quarterback for the Eagles is Florida international transfer Grayson James, not an elite player and not much of a running threat, but he is a more capable passer and a better fit maybe for Bill O'Brien's offense in that regard. James was not great last week when the Eagles lost 38-28 at SMU, but you would expect him to improve with each passing week because he's finally getting those first-team repetitions in practice. Finally, BC has a guy that I think is one of the top candidates for ACC Defensive Player of the Year or All-American honors, some of which I vote upon myself, and anything else you want to throw this guy's way. He's the defensive end, Donovan Ezaraku, and he is 4th in the country in sacks, just an absolute menace on the Boston College defense. And remember, he will be playing against a UNC team whose 2 offensive tackles, they use 3 sometimes, in different rotations. But those guys have had trouble with elite pass rushers on other teams. So that'll be one of the keys for the Tar Heels to handle as they try to extend that impressive winning streak.
Game 2 that we're going to preview is Saturday night at Wallace Wade Stadium in Durham. 5-5 Virginia Tech at 7-3 Duke. ACC Network primetime game. Hokies maybe a little surprising here, DG. They're a 3-point favorite in Durham on Saturday.
Yeah, to me, despite a slight difference in records, obviously, these 2 teams are mirror images of each other in several ways, especially one. To me, they're 2 of the top 5 defenses in the Atlantic Coast Conference. But on a week-to-week basis, another thing they have in common, unfortunately, is that neither is sure exactly what to expect from its offense, and that has especially been the case for the Hokies this season. All 5, though, of Virginia Tech's losses this year have been to quality opponents. Vanderbilt, Rutgers, Miami, Syracuse, and Clemson are all going to bowls, and all 5 of those Hokies losses were by 10 points or fewer, with that Tech defense typically keeping the Hokies in pretty much every game. The Hokies have one of the best defensive tackles in the ACC in Duke transfer Aeneas Peebles, so it'll be a homecoming for him at Wallace Wade Stadium. The Hokies also have one of the best defensive ends in the ACC in Antoine Powell-Ryland, and they're just very well coached on that side of the ball under their head coach, Brent Pry, former defensive coordinator, which is exactly what you'd also say about Duke. During this first season under head coach Manny Diaz, another former defensive coordinator. So it could be a defensive grinder type game in Durham on Saturday night. But at 7-3, the Devils still have a shot at what would be still just the second 10-win season in the history of Duke football. That is an absolutely amazing possibility, especially when you consider how much talent the team lost in the transfer portal after Mike Elko left to take the Texas A&M job last winter, and how little time Manny Diaz had to add talent from the transfer portal, although in the end he did. Here the Devils are, staring at the possibility of a 9-3 regular season with Virginia Tech obviously this week, and then a struggling Wake Forest team still ahead in Duke's regular season finale. Neither game will be easy, but both games are winnable. And regardless of where this season goes, I think Coach Diaz and his staff and players deserve a lot of credit for essentially maximizing the talent on hand. The Texas transfer Malik Murphy has been good enough at quarterback in most games. Veteran wide receivers Jordan Moore and Eli Pancol have been sensational. The New Mexico State transfer Star Thomas has been a really hard-nosed running back, and their playmakers all over that Duke defense, with a Princeton transfer, Ozzie Nicholas, a Youngstown State transfer, Alex Howard, those two guys excelling at linebacker, and a returning Blue Devil, Chandler Rivers, just a fantastic competitor at cornerback. Those are just three of Manny's guys on the defensive side, but that has been the foundation for Duke's success this year. And if they're going to win on Saturday night, I think the Blue Devils will need that defense to rise to the occasion once more.
NC State's trying to get to bowl eligibility this week. The Wolfpack 5-5. They are at 6-4 Georgia Tech. This is the primetime national TV game Thursday night, 7:30 on ESPN. The Yellow Jackets, a 9-point home favorite at Bobby Dodd Stadium in Atlanta.
Yeah, even though the Wolfpack has only 2 regular season games left, imagine how different the conversation will be in December around 12th year Wolfpack coach Dave Doran if he wins these last 2 games at Georgia Tech on Thursday night and then, of course, at UNC next weekend, compared to if he loses both games. If you finish 7-5 and maybe you win your bowl game to get to 8-5, that's essentially the continuation of a pretty positive theme, right? No, Doran, I get it. He has not taken the pack to the proverbial next level, but it would still be 10 bowl invitations for the pack in the last 11 years. In the entire 17-team ACC, only Clemson has been to the postseason more often than the Wolfpack during that stretch. And Coach Doran, again, if he finished 8-5, would be right at his average of roughly 8 wins per year over these last 11 years. That's the sign of a stable, solid program, even if you're willing to admit the weaknesses and the inefficiencies. The highs have not been extremely high in Raleigh under Coach Doran, but the extreme lows have been pretty few and far between. Contrast that picture to if the pack loses to the Yellow Jackets, loses to the Heels, and finishes 5-7, which of course means you miss the postseason entirely, and that could happen. State in that scenario would finish 2-6 in ACC play, and Dave Doran's ACC record would fall all the way to 6 games below 500. That's in conference play over the course of his entire 12-year tenure there. That would definitely leave a lot of wolves howling, as that saying goes. Now, regarding this challenge on Thursday night, it will be the Yellow Jackets' final home game and thus their senior day. So there's going to be a lot of emotion tied to that fact. Even more emotion because it's that nationally televised game that Chris described without a lot of football-related competition on TV on a Thursday night. And perhaps yet another emotional boost for the Tech fan base because remember, the Jackets are coming off their 28-23 upset of previously unbeaten Miami. Georgia Tech is a very physical team under Coach Brent Key, their head coach, who's a former Georgia Tech offensive lineman who prefers to try to run the ball down your throat more than anything else. Miami's defense last week simply could not get off the field, even though the Hurricanes knew that the Yellow Jackets were running the ball the overwhelming majority of the time. One of the trickiest wrinkles in this game from the Wolfpack perspective is for the Pack's defensive coordinator, Tony Gibson. He has to prepare his team for 2 quarterbacks. The regular Tech starter, veteran Haynes King, is that dangerous dual threat guy we've often talked about, but he has an injury that does not prevent him from running. He had 20 carries for almost 100 yards and a touchdown against the Miami Hurricanes, but that same injury has complicated Haynes King's throwing ability, and it's really obvious on video. So when he's in the game, it's most likely to be a run. Well, the other Tech quarterback, Aaron Philo, which we haven't seen a lot of, he's been executing kind of the more complete version of the playbook. he with more run pass balance. He's not a runner himself, but he throws the ball better than the injured Haynes King does. So the Wolfpack's preparation and execution on defense will be tied directly to which quarterback is in the game at any given time. So that preparation and execution is going to be central to the Wolfpack's hopes for an upset on Thursday night.
Finally, DG, as we wrap up this opening segment, give me maybe a game that involves at least one of our in-state teams that's worth a brief mention this week and why.
Yeah, later we're going to get to our state's 2 representatives in this week's Division II playoffs. So I want everybody to know we have not forgotten about either Wingate or Lenoirr-Rhyne. But for now, there are 3 more in-state FBS teams and 2 FCS teams worth very quick mentions. 6-4 ECU is actually trying to extend its record to 4-0 under the interim coach Blake Harrell as the Pirates visit 5-5 North Texas as a 3-point underdog. 4-5 App State will play its final home game of the season as a 7-point underdog to 8-2 James Madison, with Coach Sean Clark's future seemingly hanging in the balance in Boone. 4-6 Wake Forest is a 24-point underdog at 9-1 Miami, with a Demon Deacons loss, if it happens, assuring their second straight losing season under Dave Clawson, and that's in the immediate aftermath of that school record streak of 7 consecutive bowl games. Finally, at the FCS level, Western Carolina and NC Central both have very winnable road trips to what at the FCS level is the final weekend of the regular season. With victories, which I expect, the Catamounts would be 7-5 and the Eagles of Central would be 8-3. That would make them candidates to be selected as at-large bids to the FCS playoffs, which begin on November 30th this year. Although there's a pretty good chance, unfortunately, that none of our state's teams will make that 24-team FCS bracket this year. That seems to be a theme in our neighborhood, except at the D2 level, which we'll get to a little bit later.
We'll save the best stuff for a little bit later in the show. It's what we call a tease, so stay tuned for that. We'll have more of This Week in College Football with David Glenn, presented by our friends at the North Carolina Port Council, coming up in just a moment right here on the North Carolina Sports Network.
In sports, we talk a lot about impact players who make a positive difference. When it comes to our state's economy, the North Carolina pork industry is a true MVP. Each year, the pork industry plays an important role in supporting rural communities across our state. It contributes more than $10 billion a year to the North Carolina economy and supports more than 44,000 jobs. Learn more about their positive impact at ncpork.org. The North Carolina Pork Council, the foundational partner of the North Carolina Sports Network. Michael Berard, Managing Director Investments with the Founders Group at Stifel, works with a select group of high net worth individuals and institutions to develop and implement investment plans tailored to their specific objectives and risk tolerances. If you are interested in highly personalized, well-researched guidance and outstanding personal service, you can contact Michael at 984-364-2002. That's 984-364-2002. Stifel Nicholas & Company Incorporated, member SIPC and NYSE.
Welcome back to This Week in College Football with David Glenn, presented by the North Carolina Port Council. Okay, DG, diving right into our ACC and National Week 13 look ahead, brought to you by our good friends at XL Moving and Storage, a family-owned Allied Van Lines partner here in North Carolina with 25 years of award-winning experience that can help you with your move to North Carolina, within North Carolina, or away from North Carolina, even internationally, while also assisting you with all of your storage needs. Learn more at excelms.com. That's XL Moving and Storage. Only 2 top 25 versus top 25 matchups on our Week 13 national schedule. We'll get to both of those games, plus an ACC contest that involves one of the league's teams currently trying to get into the college football playoff picture. But we start in the Big Ten. Number 5, Indiana. They're 10-0. Kurt Cignetti, their head coach, hits a contract extension last week. They're visiting number 2, Ohio State. The Buckeyes, 9-1. Another noon game for Ohio State on Fox. This is a game that Ohio State is favored by 12 points in Columbus.
Yeah, before we get to the details of this matchup, hats off, if we were wearing them, to that first-year Indiana head coach Curt Cignetti, who was a regular guest on the David Glenn Show for years, in part because he was a prominent assistant at NC State under Chuck Amato in the early 2000s, and more recently, the very successful head coach at Elon University here in our state, and also James Madison at the FCS level before he took the Indiana job just this year. Now, Indiana, while a 5-time national champion in men's basketball, has rarely been even nationally relevant in football, much less this high in the rankings. And I mean during my entire lifetime. In fact, the Hoosiers have finished in the national top 25 on the gridiron only one time in the last 35 years. How's that for context regarding the rarity of what Coach Cignetti and his staff are accomplishing right now? They have rarely even had, the Hoosiers, a winning record in Big Ten play on a year-to-year basis. Their track record against this week's opponent, Ohio State, further illustrates this situation. The last time the Hoosiers beat the Buckeyes on the gridiron, home or away, was in 1988, or 36 years ago, even though the two teams have played each other in all but a handful of seasons during that period. Yet here the Hoosiers are, 10-0, and carrying that number 5 national ranking into Columbus. Now, do I think undefeated Indiana will give 9-1 Ohio State either a hard time or a close game or even maybe an upset on Saturday afternoon? No, I do not think any of those things. The Hoosiers' best wins so far this season are probably 31-17 over a 6-5 Washington squad, and that was at Indiana. And just last week, 20-15 over a 5-5 Michigan team, also at home. So it's not as if they went through a murderer's row to get to 10-0. Nevertheless, it ain't easy to get to 10-0 under any circumstances, and Indiana has annihilated most of its opponents, in part with one of the most prolific offenses in the entire country, which is number 2 nationally right now, behind only Miami at about 44 points per game. The Hoosiers quarterback, Curtis Rourke, is a highly productive player who has had a sensational season so far in his first and only year at Indiana. The Pro Football Focus guys who analyze every college football game say that Rourke has been the number 1 QB in the entire country this season in their grading system. He's a 24-year-old married guy from Canada and a former Ohio University star who transferred to Indiana soon after Curt Cignetti took the job without any promise that he would even be the Hoosiers' starting quarterback. Final fun fact on this one, Chris, because you know I can find an ACC angle in almost any story this side of a flood in Bangladesh. Curtis Rourke's number 1 school during his relatively brief time in the transfer portal last December was Wake Forest University. But right before he was going to take an official visit to Winston-Salem, the Demon Deacons told him not to come because the Deacs had accepted a commitment from the Louisiana Tech transfer, Hank Bachmeier, who, to his credit, has turned out to be a pretty good player for Wake. I do not think, for the record, that Curtis Rourke could have done at Wake what he has done at IU. But that is just a little ACC-style fun fact to consider, especially if Rourke, by the way, somehow has a great game against the Buckeyes on Saturday, maybe even in an Indiana upset. If those things happen, Curtis Rourke actually could be thrown into the Heisman Trophy picture. I don't think it'll happen, but that's one more angle to watch on Saturday afternoon.
All right, what about 9-0 Army, ranked number 24 this week, visiting, well, I say visiting, they're playing 8th-ranked Notre Dame, the Irish 9-1. This is 7 o'clock Saturday night on NBC and Peacock. The game played at Yankee Stadium, pretty cool there. Irish a 15-point favorite in the Bronx. Yeah,
let me start this one by saying that while it is a lot of fun to see these two national brands, both in the national rankings, heading into this head-to-head matchup, Army has never defeated Notre Dame in my lifetime. The Fighting Irish have won 15 consecutive games in this rivalry. Obviously, they don't play every year. And the Black Knights' most recent win came way back in 1958 during an era when Army was very prominent on a regular basis in the national rankings. For those who may not be students of college football history, Army actually claims 5 national championships in football, all during the first half of the 20th century. Now, more recently, Army, which is 9-0 and ranked number 24 nationally going into this game against Notre Dame, Army has ended a season in the national top 25 only twice in the last 65 years. So that's backdrop. That's the backdrop that this year's matchup being billed by many as the biggest in the rivalry in more than a half century. The most fun part of this clash to me is that Army's offense is by far number 1 in the nation in rushing offense at 335 yards per game, with a veteran quarterback named Bryson Daly running that triple option attack that put up, remember, 45 points on East Carolina earlier this season and 40 plus in 4 other games as well. The Black Knights are also, this surprised me, number 2 nationally in scoring defense at only 10 points per game, holding every opponent except the Pirates to 14 points or fewer during this 9-0 start. Guess what? Notre Dame is number 3 nationally in scoring defense at 11 points per game. And obviously the Fighting Irish will provide by far the most talented defensive front that Army's prolific rushing attack has faced this season. Meanwhile, the former Duke star, Riley Leonard, will lead the Irish against that 10 points per game Army defense, again, with a lot more weapons at his disposal than anything these Army guys will face this season, at least on a football field. In recent decades, the Black Knights have lost these games against Notre Dame mainly because they just have not been able to move the ball consistently against the Fighting Irish defense. My guess is that will be the case again this year at Yankee Stadium in front of what will be a huge crowd in attendance, but also what might be a pretty significant Saturday night national TV audience, as Chris said, on NBC and Peacock.
What about SMU? The Mustangs, number 14 in the country this week. They're 9-1 right now on the outside looking in to this 12-team college football playoff that is coming rapidly. The Mustangs at 5-5 Virginia, noon Saturday, ESPN2. Mustangs a 9-point favorite on the 9-point favorite on the grounds there in Charlottesville.
Yeah, SMU is a better team than Virginia in pretty much every area, and I think the Mustangs will win this game, although it is senior day for the Cavaliers, and the Mustangs will be dealing with a pretty long road trip from Dallas to Charlottesville, so who knows what might happen on Saturday afternoon. But I'm glad we brought up this game mainly because of SMU's place in the national rankings, which you made reference to, which is outside the top 10, even though the Mustangs are 9-1, and their only loss is by 3 points to a BYU team that is also 9-1 right now and another contender for the college football playoff. So obviously, when you look at the national picture, everybody agrees Oregon belongs at the top of these rankings, right? The Ducks are 11-0. They've beaten quality teams, including Ohio State, Boise State, Illinois. They went to Michigan and beat the Wolverines by 3 touchdowns. But the pecking order of one-loss teams, Chris, including SMU, is a little confusing to me because I believe the starting point for any intelligent breakdown is basically 2 things. Number one, what was the caliber of your loss if you're a one-loss team? Meaning, how good was the opponent and how much did you lose by? Well, everyone would have to agree that SMU's only loss is to that very high-quality team, 9-1 BYU, which has been high in the national rankings for many weeks now, and it was by only 3 points. So that part should not be holding SMU back or weighing down their resume in any way. The other most important factor, of course, is what are your best wins? Here, SMU does not have a lot to brag about because the Mustangs' best wins are probably at Duke, which is only 7-3 right now, against Pitt, which is only 7-3 right now, and at Louisville, which is only 6-4 right now, and maybe even TCU, which is 6-4 right now. So those are 4 good wins for the Mustangs, but nobody would suggest that any of those are great wins, right? But here's the rest of that picture. Has anyone looked at Texas's schedule? The Longhorns are members of the mighty Southeastern Conference right now. I get it. But the Longhorns' best win as we speak is probably, even in late November, over a 5-5 Michigan team in Ann Arbor. Texas's next best win is probably a squeaker by 3 points at Vanderbilt, which is only 6-4 right now. Now, to its credit, I'm not blind to the fact that Texas has absolutely mashed, annihilated, destroyed, curb stomped most of its other opponents, which drives up their analytics. But let's not forget that even Texas, which is way up there at number 3 in the polls, also has not yet beaten a single great football team. And in their toughest game of the season, by the way, remember SMU's was a close game to a top 10 BYU team. In the Longhorns' toughest game of the season, they got waxed 30-15 by the Georgia Bulldogs. P.S., number 4 in the rankings, Penn State, has not beaten a single great team either yet. Now, let's make sure we keep that other best wins factor in mind for all of these playoff candidates and not just the SMU Mustangs of the ACC.
All right, we'll take a break. We'll come back and have more with DG on This Week in College Football, presented by the North Carolina Port Council, coming up in just a moment on the North Carolina Sports Network.
The Lawson Insurance Group in Raleigh is a family-owned business led by 3 actual brothers who happen to be huge sports fans: Ken Lawson, Miller Lawson, and Michael Lawson. I know these guys, I trust these guys, and I send these guys my own insurance business and that of my family. The next time you have insurance needs, I hope you'll do the same. The Lawson Insurance Group is known for its commitment to community and its dedication to ensuring that North Carolinians and their businesses are prepared for life's inevitable challenges, with the reminder that as a high street insurance partner, Lawson Insurance Group offers local expertise and support that, combined with High Street's extensive national resources, means more choice and support for you as their client. To learn more, search Lawson Insurance Group online. The Lawson Insurance website will be the first link that pops up. I am a better person and a more effective business owner for having known and learned from Emily Parks over many years now. Emily's company, Organize for Success, helps multi-passionate business owners and executives bring harmony to all the layers of their lives, from work to side projects, from friends and family to hobbies, community, and beyond. With Emily's help, you too can make every minute matter. She helps you determine what earns your time and how to efficiently accomplish what matters. One of the many things I love about Emily is that she does not impose her will on her clients. She listens to them. That way she can better help them cultivate the lives they want to live. You can set up a complimentary call with Emily today by visiting organizeforsuccess.com.
Welcome back to This Week in College Football with David Glenn, presented by our great friends at the North Carolina Port Council. Diving right in, DG, to our coaches and quarterbacks segment, brought to you by our friends at Lawson Insurance, who earlier this month celebrated their family-owned business's 50th anniversary of helping DG and many other North Carolina citizens and businesses with their personal and commercial insurance needs. You can reach out to the brothers Ken Miller and Michael Lawson. Like all of us, they're huge sports fans. Give them a call, 919-846-2090, or search Lawson Insurance online. Now, we do have a blend of both quarterbacks and coaches this week, in part because your All-America and ACC ballots are due in just a couple of weeks, and also in part we've had another head coaching change here in the Old North State. We'll start, though, with the quarterbacks. Which quarterback do you believe at this point should be part of the Heisman Trophy conversation, DJ?
Yeah, I think there are 2, with the possibility of others maybe joining. Right now, for those who haven't been dialed into this part of the national picture, I'd say that 2 of the top 4 candidates for the Heisman Trophy are quarterbacks, but I might describe the other 2 as the front runners for the award, and they are not quarterbacks. Colorado's two-way phenom, the wide receiver / cornerback Travis Hunter, has been an amazing player for Deion Sanders and the 8-2 Buffaloes, who do have a shot to win the Big 12 title this season and participate in the college football playoff. So we'll see how his season ends. Meanwhile, the Boise State running back, Ashton Jeanty, that I made an oblique reference to earlier when I was discussing UNC's Omarion Hampton. Jeanty is putting up insane rushing numbers for the Broncos, who are 9-1 and might make the college football playoff as the Mountain West Conference champion. Just for perspective, there are 20 players in America who are averaging at least 100 rushing yards per game. So 120 players. Only Omarion Hampton and Jeanty are way over 100 yards. Hampton in the 140-ish range, and Jeanty is up there at about 190 rushing yards per game. So he is truly standing out even among other brilliant running backs like Omarion Hampton. So there's a great chance that Jeanty will be in New York City as a Heisman Trophy finalist. And I think Travis Hunter of Colorado probably will be there too. But the top two quarterbacks in this picture right now are Cam Ward of the top 10 Miami Hurricanes, who we've discussed a lot on our show this season, and Dillon Gabriel of the number 1 ranked Oregon Ducks. Basically, Cam Ward leads the entire nation with about 350 passing yards per game. He leads the entire nation with 32 passing touchdowns against only 6 interceptions this year. And he's completing about 2/3 of his passes for a Miami team that's been a bit shaky defensively and has needed Ward to have some of those Heisman-style moments and repeatedly rescue the Hurricanes in their close games. It's hard to be more valuable at any position than Cam Ward has been for the Canes this season, and he's clearly the front runner in my eyes for the ACC Player of the Year honor, and another guy who likely will end up in New York City. The other guy that I mentioned, Dillon Gabriel of Oregon, he's completing 74% of his passes for the Ducks, who are now 11-0. We all know that this Heisman thing often goes to quarterbacks and running backs for really, really highly ranked teams. So that combination puts Dillon Gabriel in the picture. He was also sensational, remember, in the Ducks' biggest win of the season, that 32-31 thriller over Ohio State back in mid-October.
All right, let's talk about coaches now, DG. And as you remember, last month, East Carolina fired Mike Houston, who was in his 6th year in Greenville. Now, earlier this week, the Charlotte 49ers dismissed Biff Poggi, who was in the middle of his 2nd season leading that program. What did you think of the move, and where do the 49ers go from here?
Yeah, among the 7 FBS programs here in North Carolina, the Charlotte job is truly unique because the head coach is trying to elevate a program that has essentially zero tradition or success. There simply are no glory days the way there are at all the other programs at the FBS level that we cover in this state. The modern program at Charlotte has existed for only 12 seasons and under 3 different head coaches now, Brad Lambert, Will Healy, and Biff Poggi. The 49ers have had exactly 1 winning season in those 12 years. That was a 7-6 campaign, which included a bowl game and the first bowl game in program history under Will Healy back in 2019. Obviously, that kind of track record over a relatively short period, it does not help you build a solid fan base. It does not help inspire future recruits. It is a difficult job, especially now that the 49ers are in the American Athletic Conference, where schools like Army, Navy, Tulane, Memphis, and others have things going right now, and where even a school such as East Carolina has a stadium that's 3 times larger than Charlotte's football stadium. The Pirates also have a tradition of great teams, great coaches, sending players to the NFL. They have that large, passionate fan base where Pirate Nation includes multiple generations, young and old, of fans of that program, whereas Charlotte, in the big city of Charlotte, and as a relatively new entry on the entertainment scene there, has an uphill battle in that regard. Now, Charlotte's athletic director, Mike Hill, who happens to be a UNC Chapel Hill grad, in his first AD job after many years as an assistant AD working for the Florida Gators in the SEC, he took a huge risk on Biff Poggi 2 years ago. And it's not at all surprising to me personally that that hire has kind of blown up in Mike Hill's face. Biff Poggi was a 62-year-old man with only 3 years of experience in college football when the 49ers hired him. He had been a legendary high school football coach in Maryland, and I mean for decades. And he had spent the 2021 and 22 seasons on Jim Harbaugh's staff at Michigan when the Wolverines, remember, were winning back-to-back Big Ten titles and finishing number 3 in the national rankings both years. Poggi also was a very successful hedge fund manager, a self-made millionaire, and a really big personality who loved to talk a big game, but he ultimately failed to back up the boastful words with enough victories on the field. Building a college football program is dramatically different than building a high school football program. And obviously, there aren't many parallels between Michigan football and Charlotte football. Biff Poggi went 3-9 last year in his first season at Charlotte, and that was understandable as part of a rebuilding effort. But his 3-7 record this year not only showed a lack of progress and another missed bowl game, obviously, but the 49ers were not even competitive in most of their defeats. During their current 4-game winning streak, they lost 51-17 at Navy, 34-3 against Tulane, and most recently 59-24 at home against a middling South Florida team that had entered the game with a 4-5 record. For anyone wondering why any head coach would get only 2 years to turn around a program, I would remind everyone of the timing here. The cost of running any major college athletic program is in the process of going up. I mean, in a big way, at a more rapid acceleration than usual, because of, among other things, the settlement of the NCAA's House lawsuit and the new expense of millions of dollars of name, image, likeness money that at some point is going to come straight from a university's athletic department budget. Meanwhile, at Charlotte specifically, the 49ers will be breaking ground, Chris, on a $60 to $70 million expansion of Jerry Richardson Stadium in 2025. And there's additional fundraising pressure related to that multi-year long-term project, which eventually, and I mean over the longer haul, will double the capacity of that venue from around 15,000 to around 30,000, which even then will be relatively small for an FBS program. Whoever Charlotte hires next must have a personal track record, in my opinion, as a college coach specifically, of being a part of winning programs and also sending players to the NFL. And he must have the reputation of someone who can attract quality assistant coaches, because obviously the 49ers themselves just do not have enough gridiron history such that the program itself is the number one selling point, as it is at so many of the other schools that the 49ers are now competing against in the American Athletic Conference, but also around the great state of North Carolina.
All right, DG, we're going to use our last time out here. We'll come back and wrap things up on This Week in College Football, presented by the North Carolina Port Council.
Whether you are moving locally, nationally, or even internationally, and whether you're a residential or commercial customer, please consider our friends at XL Moving and Storage, an award-winning Allied Van Lines agent with offices in Greensboro and Raleigh. Thanks to their 25 years of experience helping North Carolinians all across the state with their moving and storage needs, XL has become the trusted hometown North Carolina moving services company. Our good friends Jim Dorsett and Jody Hatley, along with their hardworking staff, offer customized, tailored relocation and storage solutions to the people of North Carolina and beyond. Visit them online today at xlms.com. That's EXCELMS.com.
This segment brought to you by our great friends at Atlantic Tire and Service, where DG and his family take all of their vehicles for routine maintenance, service needs, and a world-class selection of new tires. Atlantic Tire and Service, your one-stop tire and auto repair provider with highly trained technicians and a sales and support staff that are second to none. They've grown to 6 Triangle area locations, 2 in Raleigh, 2 in Cary, 1 in Durham, and 1 in Wake Forest. You can learn more online at AtlanticTireOnline.com. Welcome back to This Week in College Football with David Glenn, presented by the North Carolina Port Council. And while This Week in College Football's coverage is going to emphasize the top level of college football, both here in North Carolina and nationally, we love to celebrate any success stories in our state that excel, whether it's the FCS level, Division II, Division III. It doesn't matter. We're looking for good stories, especially right now. So with that thought in mind, there are 2 in-state teams participating in the Division II playoffs this Saturday. We bring you our college football postseason snapshot, brought to you by our good friends at Jimmy's Bar and King Neptune Restaurant in Wrightsville Beach. Jimmy's has a full bar, nightly drink specials, and live music 365 days a year. And right next door, you'll find King Neptune. It's become one of the best restaurants in the entire greater Wilmington area. Keep up with Jimmy's on Facebook and learn more about King Neptune Restaurant at neptuneswb.com. Our state does not have a team in the Division III playoffs, DG. We will not have a team in that newly expanded college football 12-team playoff, and we're probably not going to get anybody in the FCS bracket either. But thankfully, 2 teams carrying the mantle for the entire state this Saturday in the Division II playoffs. Wingate, or Wingate, ever how you say it, they're in the South Atlantic Conference champion after they beat Carson Newman last week. And Lenoirr-Rhyne, Wingate or Wingate's longtime rival, they got into the field as an at-large invitation, a team that's been in the national rankings all season long. We're going to break down these 2 matchups. Playoff game number 1, Virginia Union, 8-3 at number 17, Wingate, 1 o'clock, Wingate 9-1 on Saturday, ESPN+.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned ESPN Plus because fans of both Wingate and Lenoirr-Rhyne have been asking me that question. The D2 playoffs have not always been on ESPN Plus or any other major platform. So that's the later games have in the playoffs, but not these first round games. So it's kind of cool that fans have that option if they can't get to the game in person. On the Wingate game, first, let's give a shout out to the Wingate athletic director, Joe Reich, who's also the university's legendary former head football coach, and also shout out the Bulldogs' first-year head coach, Rashawn Jordan, who was Reich's longtime defensive coordinator before being elevated to the top job. These last 15 years represent the greatest stretch in the history of Wingate football. All 6 of the program's Division II playoff bids have come since 2010. All 3 of the program's South Atlantic Conference football titles have come relatively recently, too, in 2010 and 2017 under Coach Reich, and obviously here in 2024 under Coach Jordan. Over the last 8 years, Wingate has actually been the best program in the South Atlantic Conference, and the numbers back that up. They're 73-21 overall in that period, and 49-13 in league play. Quick fun fact, by the way, Joe Reich's brother, Frank Reich, was that Maryland Terrapins quarterback in the early 1980s who went on to play in the NFL for more than a decade and then coached in the NFL for almost 2 decades, including just last season in his very brief and forgettable tenure as the head coach of the Carolina Panthers in our backyard. Now, regarding this playoff game on Saturday night against Virginia Union, I don't usually do this on our show, Chris, but I have a prediction.
Let's go.
Wingate's going to win.
Yes.
The Bulldogs play in a better conference than Virginia Union does. They are on their home field where they have not lost all season. They're 9-1, as Chris said. They have a 7-game winning streak. They just avenged their only loss of the regular season, which was on the road and in overtime, so a nail-biter, by beating Carson Newman convincingly 28-13 last week in the South Atlantic Championship game. Wingate is an elite defensive team, number 5 nationally in scoring defense, with the Bulldogs giving up only 10 points per game on the season. Their defensive end, Marquise Fleming, is a product of Charlotte's Olympic High School. We love in-state guys. He leads the nation in tackles for loss at the D2 level, and he gets plenty of help from guys like Kai Russell, who's from the same Charlotte Olympic High School, Daniel Morrison, Dontorian Best, and a bunch of other guys on that side, who previously played under Coach Jordan when he was their defensive coordinator. They're incredibly well coached on that side of the ball, especially like a Duke team that we've discussed all year. The Bulldogs are not allowed to look ahead, by the way, but we are allowed to look ahead. With a victory Saturday over Virginia Union, Wingate not only advances, they would get to host another playoff game at Irwin Belk Stadium next Saturday. Their opponent would be the game we're about to discuss, the winner of it, Lenoirh-Rhyne or West Alabama, which is intriguing in part, of course, because the Bears of Lenoirh-Rhyne are Wingate's longtime rival that the Bulldogs did beat earlier this year in Hickory in what was a really intense, really competitive 14-10 ball game that obviously Wingate won as part of their run to that conference championship.
Really tough draw, though, for Lenoirh-Rhyne. You mentioned they're 9-2, number 15 in the poll, and they get the number 12 team, West Alabama, who's also 9-1. This is 2 o'clock on Saturday, also on ESPN+. Brutal draw for the Bears.
Yeah, while it's accurate to say that Wingate has been the best Division II program in our state lately, I gave you those last 8 years number, it's also accurate to say that Lenoirh-Rhyne has been the best D2 program in our state historically. The Bears have 11 all-time South Atlantic Conference championships, including 6 outright titles, which is second only to Carson Newman in the history of that league. Lenoirh-Rhyne also has challenged for the Division II national championship a couple times over the years, whereas Wingate, for example, has never made it past the quarterfinals in that NCAA bracket. In 2013, under Mike Houston, yes, the recently dismissed ECU coach, Lenoirh-Rhyne made it all the way to the national championship game. Just last year, under Coach Mike Jacobs, who's now the head coach of a really good Mercer team at the FCS level, the Bears made it all the way to the national semifinals. For perspective on that, no South Atlantic Conference team has ever won the NCAA's Division II national championship. So those 2 postseason trips I just described by the Bears are among the best in the history of that league, not just the Lenoirh-Rhyne program. Now, regarding Saturday's game against West Alabama, I agree with Chris's quick overview there. Whereas Wingate is at home and a heavy favorite against Virginia Union, Lenoirh-Rhyne has to go on the road, has to take on a highly regarded West Alabama team that is 9-1, that is ranked number 12 in the Division II top 25. In the only 2 previous matchups between these programs, they happened in 2017 and 2018. The Bears are 0-2 against West Alabama, although one of those 2 matchups was a nail-biter that went down to the wire. Now, under the Bears' first-year head coach, Doug Socia, Lenoirh-Rhyne has been one of the better defensive teams in the South Atlantic Conference, giving up only about 17 points per game. The Bears' offense has been harder to predict. That's going to be one of the keys if they're going to beat West Alabama. The redshirt junior quarterback, Jalen Ferguson, another in-state guy, he's from West Forsyth High School in Winston-Salem. He has been one of the better quarterbacks in the conference this season after sharing time with another really good QB, Sean White, on last year's NCAA semifinal team. This game is much more difficult to predict, although it certainly would be fun to see Lenoirh-Rhyne and Wingate get a rematch next week in the playoff second round.
We need some positive stories, so we're going to root for that.
Amen.
That's going to do it for our show this week. Thanks, as always, to the North Carolina Port Council for being the founding partner of the North Carolina Sports Network. And we welcome Atlantic Tire and Service, now with 6 locations in the Triangle, as our newest sponsor. A reminder that DG and his staff are posting daily articles at our fast-growing website, ncsportsnetwork.com, that has direct links on its homepage to this YouTube channel, which includes so many short videos that our friend Mike Waddell is putting together. You can also check out the wide variety of places you can find on-demand audio and podcasts of our show, The David Glenn Show, and all of the other offerings that we have, and updates on year 2 of our Old North State Tailgate and Traveling Sports Circus, which will be in Boone this Saturday for the Mountaineers' final home game of the season, and in Chapel Hill on November 30th for the annual battle between the Wolfpack and the Tar Heels. So for David Glenn, I'm Chris Edwards. Thanks so much for joining us this week for This Week in College Football right here on the North Carolina Sports Network.